Good evening and welcome. I'm Sheila Balgobin and I am the Dream Decipherer, and I help you to crack the code of your sleep and dreams so you can sleep sound and dream deep. This evening, it seems like versus churching is is the subject here. So let's get into it and see what's going on. The dreamer reports that they were at a funeral, and the dreamer's dad was playing the piano, and the hymn that was being played was called This Is My Body. And apparently, whoever they were, and I'm not sure if that's the congregation or the choir or someone else, but in any case, someone sang two verses led by a soloist. From there, the next little vignette comes, and a friend comes by the dreamer's home and started criticizing the dreamer for not going to church. And the dreamer's response was to think, "This is ridiculous. I will never go to church again." And decided to go instead to a nightclub. Now, the friend's daughter seemed to be approving of the dreamer's action in terms of going raving instead of going to church. Then the dream switches, and the dreamer is in a future world where people are encouraged to be snitches, and to carry tales about their friends and neighbors when they broke the law. And what would happen is the person doing the snitching would put in some kind of code for the violation that it was, into a computer system, and the computer would check if the crime had actually been committed on that day. They would, I guess, pass sentence on the person and hand down the punishment, including the death penalty. And the dream ends there. So you've got three distinct little vignettes, that don't really appear to have much to do with each other, but we'll see. If they were dreamt in sequence, there was some thread connecting all of them. First of all, look at the first bit, which is that the dreamer is at a funeral. Now, the dad, in the dream, and we all will always have to remember that the people who are in our dreams don't necessarily appear as themselves, but are some aspect of the dreamer. And so my first question here with the dreamer would be, what does dad, just in a more general sense, what does dad or father represent? Being that they were at a funeral, you could also impute some religious overtones to that. You're in the father's house, assuming that they're in a church having this funeral. The Their funerals can be dreams about actual funerals, or it can be symbolic of burying something or the ending of something, and it's a permanent change or ending. So there is something there that I would ask the dreamer: is there something, some aspect of the dreamer's life that is being buried, that is being laid to rest, so to speak? If Whose funeral was it? That's my question. Was it a friend? Was it a family member? Who was actually being being funeralized in this ceremony? But again, looking at it in the broader sense, it's like, what is being buried by the dreamer? Now, this hymn that was being played during this funeral service was "This Is My Body," which is generally, at least in the traditions that I'm aware of, Christian traditions, is usually sung during the Eucharist when the communion is taking place. So there's also this implication that something is being changed or transmuted in some way, perhaps literally through the Eucharist, through having communion, but on a more symbolic level, something as being cleansed, changed in some way. And I would ask the dreamer here if there's some habit or activity that is being transmuted or buried or removed in some way, or has been killed off perhaps in some way. So moving on from there, we go to the friend who stops by the dreamer's home and starts slagging the dreamer off for not going to church. And the dreamer says in response, I'm not going to church anymore. That's fine. And decides to go to a rave at a nightclub instead. The impression that I got from this when I read it, it sounded a bit like like a 3 or 4 year old stamping their foot because they can't have their way, and having a little bit of a tantrum. Um, that was the first impression, but the even as an adult, the adult reaction was, well, I'm not going there, so I'm going to rave, okay? I mean, so it's kind of like in your face still. So an adult tantrum of sorts. But what's interesting about this is that the friend who does the criticizing has a daughter who apparently appears somewhere from the into the dream, and actually seems to be applauding the dreamer's action of going to the nightclub instead of to church. And I there was some doubt here on the dreamer's part as to whether the daughter was actually approving or not. And I would ask at this point is could the this daughter represent the anima or the inner female, the part of the male, the inner female that is it encourages connection and relationship. And I just wonder if this daughter is trying to encourage the dreamer to um, be in relationship with himself, and do his thing rather than what other people expect him to do. So, and then I, instead of following the crowd, and the analogy that came up here was like a sheep. And then here you are at a funeral singing a communion song. And one of the songs that popped into my head is Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Again, a communion rite. So there's something very strong here about relationship and inner relationships rather than outer ones. And perhaps this may be something for the dreamer to consider about following their own path. Then you have the future world of the snitches. And let me tell you, even cops, even though they may use them, and I know this from family members, even if they use snitches, they hate them. Nobody likes a snitch. But this the dreamer dreams that there was some kind of future where basically the government or the powers that be were encouraging people to snitch on one another. So it's a nameless, faceless justice via a computer that gets meted out. So very impartial, of course, because it's a computer that's doing it. But it was a reminder of the book 1984 by George Orwell. Very canny book, by the way, still valid today. And there was something called the thought police who roamed around, and if you were thinking about committing a crime, they would pick you up. And there's a very definite sense of that the dreamer feels that this is somewhat of a police state where the government is very heavy-handed in its control. And I would ask here if there's an area in the dreamer's life where the dreamer feels that they're living in a police state of sorts, or a nanny state, as they call it here in the UK, where they're just overbearing and overweening, and basically telling us what to do, when to do it, how to do it, um, and not giving us much choice about the matter. There was also something recently in the last few days, actually, about a case in, I believe, Singapore, where a British man has actually been arrested. He'd been shopped by somebody. Somebody had basically ratted him out, because he wasn't wearing a mask in public, which is mandatory. It is the law. And the man is very upset. Said, how could they arrest me and put me on trial for not wearing a mask? But it was the law. But that's, as you can see, a form of very heavy-handed justice. And I wonder if events like that have been happening have been an influence in this particular instance with the dream. So, what connects these these very strange, and different vignettes? And it's the very disconnection that is the connection between them. Um, there, there's at the funeral, you have the disconnect from earthly things and people. Then you have the going raving. So instead of praying, he chooses a different experience. And who's to say that going to a rave can be any less of a spiritual experience than going to church? Trance dancing has been around as long as humans have been around, and is still practiced in many cultures around the world. So, dance is, I know for me personally, dance transports me someplace very far and away from everything. So it's an spiritual experience, but one that is not considered standard, and taking place in the nightclub, where drinking and other things may be going on, may not be quite the high level spiritual experience one expects, but nevertheless it can be. And it's, I just wonder here again if this is the anima, the daughter, in the friend's daughter, who is encouraging the dreamer perhaps to look at going his own way. And if raving, so to speak, not literally, but could be, is how, he is able to access his inner life, his spiritual life, then who's to say that that's wrong? In the third vignette, the future world, there's seems to be a disconnect from basic decency, with a breakdown of society and the government actually encouraging people to spy on one another and to turn one another in, all in the interests of law and order. There's while people are disconnected from one another, they're all connected to this supercomputer who metes out justice, including capital punishment, um, to and in a so-called blind and fair way. But who's feeding the information into that computer? There could be people who are, and here we go with conspiracy theories. But seriously, couldn't there be people who want to settle scores with a business partner, with this one, with an old, with an ex, whoever, and by ratting on them and being a snitch? You have to wonder. So there's a disconnect of people actually having connections to one another, and all being fed into and connected to this computer that spits them out as it will, to be punished. And my questions here is that with all this connections of the normal trappings of life, and finding a different way, how does the dreamer feel about the system? And I use that in a general sense, the system being all of the things that restrict and impede and perhaps are, even unhealthy for, Joe and Jane average. How does he feel about that? Does the dreamer actually feel capable of being able to withstand the system and bucking the system and going his own way or not? That's something perhaps the dreamer needs to look at, what areas of their life where they're bucking the system, and whether that it's worth trying to fight the system or just to go your own way and deal with it as it comes. And my other question here for the dreamer is, where in the dreamer's life may the dreamer be burying old ways of being or old ways of doing things? This may just be a signal to the dreamer that there has been some inner shifting going on, and the things that once served or once were useful, good, nice, whatever, are no longer valid and therefore have to be buried and or killed off in some way, so that they fall away, that they're no longer an issue. And perhaps that's something for the dreamer to give some more thought to. So there you have it, disconnected connections. And whether it's better to go raving or to go to church. Thanks so much for watching and listening. If you have a dream that you'd like to have anonymously not worked on during this time, do get in contact with me. You can leave your details here in the comments, or you can send me a message. Have a lovely evening and rest of the week, though I think we're supposed to get more rain. Oh dear. This rain is a killer. And I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.